Hello and welcome, dear friends, as we begin this 18th year of the Turner Winter Series. I'm Maureen Rovegno, and I offer this welcome on behalf of Greg Peterson, who is the founder and perennial host of the Turner Winter Series these many years. We welcome with delight those of you who are with us this evening in the comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as all those who are enjoying this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our evening with a brief introduction of our guest, Randall Perry, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Randall Perry is the Executive Director of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. He works on a variety of lake, watershed, and research initiatives in partnership with Alliance members and with other stakeholders, all aimed at protecting and enhancing the health and usability of Chautauqua Lake. Prior to beginning his tenure as the Executive Director in late 2020, Randall worked as the Alliance's project manager since 2016. Before joining the Alliance, he served as an adjunct instructor at Fredonia State University of New York, teaching geoscience and environmental science courses, with a focus on water resources, geochemistry, surficial processes, and environmental assessment. Before that, he worked as a geological consultant specializing in environmental and water resource projects. Randall is a native of Maine, where he earned his bachelor and master degrees in earth sciences from the University of Maine, with a focus on environmental geochemistry, and it has been an amazing career, which he continues with great enthusiasm here for us. And so, with this impressive background, it is now my great pleasure to welcome back Randall Perry with Greg Peterson to give us an update on the state of our Chautauqua Lake.
Randall Perry, rock star extraordinaire, graduate of Maine, the Maine Black Bears. A little known fact that came across ESPN about the Maine Black Bears, that they have a football team, not men, but women. And they're called the Maine Mayhem. And it's the first and only women's full contact women's football team. Are you aware of this?
I am now.
Is this the type of people that you grew up with in Maine?
Well, not those players in particular, but certainly Maine can be a bastion for unique capabilities and interests and trend setting, I suppose. So good for them. I wish them luck.
So here you are in Chautauqua County. You are the Executive Director of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance, and this is your third year here. Why did you accept the invitation to come back after the first two?
Those auto-send calendar replies. No, I appreciate the opportunity to be back, and frankly, it should be me that's thanking you for allowing me the chance to be here. So I appreciate it, and look forward to it with great anticipation under the Christmas tree. So.
Well, you know, what's interesting is this is the first time we're live, so we got to kind of watch. I can't go back and edit stuff. So for the benefit of the camera, your actual organization is called the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management and Watershed Alliance, which includes covering Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan and also the Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy. That's in your mission statement. Just for the audience, what is the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan, which I know took a long time to get to a document? That is a document.
It is a document, and just for clarity, there is an "and" between lake and watershed in our name, which is an important distinction when it comes to the fact that we're asked to look at both the lake itself and the watershed that drains to it. But the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan was an undertaking prior to the existence of the Alliance. The Alliance was formed in late 2014, began operations in 2015. The Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan was finalized in 2010. It's a very, very comprehensive document that really sought to bring together a wealth of decades and decades of work and information about the lake and the watershed primarily that drains to it. It looks at a variety of physical and chemical and biological, i.e. people and the animals that subsist on the watershed. I really sought to bring that together in a cohesive way to better understand what contributions the watershed have on the lake, what effects does the watershed have on the lake, and really seek to take it at a sub-basin standpoint. So Chautauqua Lake has around 14 primary drainage basins within the one basin, and looking at those individually was a key part of the document. So a lot of information on whether it's Ball Creek or DeWittville Creek or Big Inlet or the peripheral watersheds in the South Basin draining places like Lakewood. They all have very unique characteristics, so looking at them on an individual basis is an important part of that document, and then really bringing them together, trying to synthesize the overall picture for the lake. It's got a lot of recommendations on different ways that watershed management can be used as a tool to improve lake conditions, things like erosion control, the control of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen running off the landscape to the lake, to the streams and to the lake. The way that stormwater is managed in municipal areas, the way that agriculture has an effect on the watershed and ultimately the waterways draining to the lake. Again, multiple sections, very, very layered approach. And, while the year on that document is 13 years ago now, it still maintains a very important place in that it really serves as a benchmark document for the physical setting that has so much impact on the lake itself even today.
As a plan, was it something adopted by the county legislature, or how did it become a plan?
Well, it was prepared by a set of consultants under guidance from the county and from technical advisors that were put in place from local stakeholders, local groups. The Chautauqua Lake Management Commission was kind of a precursor of sorts to the Alliance. Mm-hmm. It was a very comprehensively focused group of professionals, stakeholders, experts. The need for the plan was identified as a way to understand the system, but largely to really drive this movement towards a new way of securing funds to manage the lake and the watershed. So, the plan is a tool in that regard, in that it's looked at by the state or by the federal government, whether it's the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation at the state level, or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's an important guidance document that shows that as a community we've taken the steps to say we understand that when we look at something in a lake, we're not just looking at what's in the lake that day or even that year. It's a culmination of years and decades and even centuries worth of watershed impacts. As to its status, whether adopted, enacted, approved, endorsed, from our perspective, we look at it as a very, very valid and very useful technical resource that we continue to use and continue to lean on. And it's still a very important document for the county as well, as they've guided their programs, whether it's the occupancy tax program, the waterways program. It's a tool for a lot of us to use as a community.
Well, it has a tool which covers the 14, I think you said, access points of the watershed, and I think it covers 102, can I be correct? 102,000 acres is the watershed? Is that about the size of it all?
Yeah, the number sounds right.
Yeah, and by the way, when you drive around and you see signage on major highways into Chautauqua County, you'll see entering the Chautauqua Watershed. And sometimes you wonder how it got so far away from where we were, but nevertheless, that's how you demarked it, around. And is that then a tool for your funding so that when you apply to the state, you apply for the feds, that we like this project because it fits nicely and four square under the plan? Is that a necessity to advance a project?
It depends. It depends on who you're asking for those funds. As the Alliance, any local funds that we're asked to help administer and prioritize and allocate, certainly the watershed boundary is a key distinction for us. Basically, if it's outside that boundary, it's not something that we're able to direct our time, attention, or resources to. At the state level, it's interesting. If you're looking at state grants, for instance, or the way the Department of Environmental Conservation views projects, i.e. the money that the state may bring into a local area, being inside the Chautauqua Lake watershed is oftentimes a very important and oftentimes a very advantageous setting for project proposals. So in 2018, the state initiated a harmful algal bloom action plan program. They identified a short list of New York State lakes, and Chautauqua was one of only a few across the state that was identified for this program that resulted in another plan, the harmful algal bloom action plan that was prepared by the New York State DEC, among others. And so in certain grant programs, there are additional points that may be allocated to a project proposal given its location in an impaired watershed or in a watershed that's been deemed a high priority for state investments. And we're silver lining or glass half full, glass half empty, by virtue of having this harmful algal bloom action plan, by virtue of being assigned this priority water body listing in terms of harmful algal blooms, which can be looked at as a negative. In terms of investments from the state, it positions us in a stronger way compared to others.
Let's just kind of go down that road, because it got an awful lot of press when it happened, that we were designated one of four, I think, lakes within the state. You're right, half full, half empty, but it did provide you needed resources to do what? What was not only the study, was there then an implementation after that?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I believe the number was around 12.
12.
So it was not a big number, especially when you think about the scale of New York State.
Right.
Initially, the preparation of that plan brought a lot of technical resources from the state and the consultants that they worked with to the area. Members of our lake community were asked to serve on steering committees of stakeholders. So right there was an opportunity to get engaged at a high level. There was just the sheer amount of data and the sheer amount of information that was being processed and synthesized by these technically proficient groups. That's a benefit to us. It serves as a reference. It brought together a lot of past information, brought it up to current, and looked forward as well. The initial state funding that then was released soon after these harmful algal bloom plans, there was an added benefit to being in one of those 12 priority lakes. So right there was a pretty quick impact. A couple of the projects that were funded in that year included some pretty big investments in Chautauqua Lake. So the purchase and deployment of 2 new skimmers for aquatic plant and debris cleanup. Those were secured through a round of funding not long after that harmful algal bloom action plan was finalized. Also, the town of Busti and the village of Lakewood, we were able to secure with them a a set of grants that helped to stabilize and improve a number of their roadside swales network, which is a big important improvement that led to the installation of over 100 trees and other plants along their roadways, in addition to stabilization with rock structures and things like that. The Village of Lakewood, their Chautauqua Avenue Green Street project was in that round of funding that was near the time that HAB action plan was. So it didn't necessarily create a direct line connection where the state said, because you're on this list, because you have a plan, here is money that is solely dedicated to you, but it did give a leg up on some of the grant applications that came subsequent to that, we believe, is our understanding. And since then, there's been a number of other spin-offs. 2018 seems like so long ago, but when you think about it, it really wasn't. But I'm not here to try to connect every dot and say this happened because of this or that. But when you look at the totality of the harmful algal bloom action plan, a couple years later, the introduction of a major research initiative to Chautauqua Lake and the Jefferson Project to complement and work with several of the other research initiatives that came online in the last 5 to 7 years on the lake. These things there's synergy in that. It may not necessarily be a direct line connection of one to the other, but this approach of creating this feedstock of information, answering questions, but also yielding better new questions and figuring out what the best way is to then align resources and draw in outside or use internal or close to home expertise. And it's really taken off from there. Now, harmful algal bloom mitigation and reduction, those are still things that the state is still working on. One of the big spin-outs from the action plans was that the state then undertook a variety of pilot tests on a number of these priority lakes to assess different technologies and approaches to nutrient reduction, harmful algal bloom intervention, these things that really aren't on the market yet, and the state is still trying to figure out what, if any, it's going to endorse, promote, permit, etc. But pretty quickly we had a large-scale Army Corps pilot project working with a consultant, AECOM, to look at the Habitats program, where it's basically a set of barges that would go out and collect algae and process and transform it into a non-harmful, usable resource to create potentially biofuels or other materials, and also a shore system. So a lot happened, but still we're still very early in the stage of really knowing what, if anything, is appropriate for this lake in terms of nutrient reductions in the lake, harmful algal bloom, hands-on management, whether it's through technologies or amendments to the chemical setting or the physical setting of the lake. But so to answer your question, a heck of a lot, but also still a lot more to come that we're continuing to keep a close eye on.
Does the state and the feds deem the alliance to be the quarterback of all of these various initiatives?
I wouldn't say that. I think it's up to each entity or even people within those entities to determine who they work with, who they seek information from, who they bring together for whatever their purposes are. There's a lot of teamwork in this. Just looking back at the Habitats program, the Chautauqua Lake Association hosted a big part of that program, down at their shop in Lakewood. The Parks Department up in Long Point, another founding member of the Alliance. The Chautauqua Institution, of course, with their growing and ongoing relationship with the Jefferson Project, they're playing a critical role. And I, please don't take not naming everyone as a slight against anybody, but it's really, and I think that speaks to the power of this collective community, is that there are so many different core competencies and ways that many of these different stakeholders, either individually or as groups, can help and do help. whether it's sampling on the lake or whether it's liaising with researchers and helping with logistics. The state has, when they're working on whether it's permitting requests for herbicides, they're working directly with the Chautauqua Lake Partnership and their lake manager and the municipalities that are seeking permits. When they're working with fisheries, they're working with other elements. So I'm very proud of the role that we play, the role that we can play in facilitating good relationships and also facilitating the transfer of good information. Trying to synthesize and bring together a lot of stuff that can seem pretty disparate on its face, but when you get down to it, it's so intertwined. Sometimes it's just a matter of putting the right threads in the right place to really make things a little more useful to those that are consuming it. So I certainly take great pride. The GIS, the Geographical Information System capabilities of that we're really trying to prioritize has been critical. We've got decades and decades of great data. Increasingly over the last several years, we've been really trying to stress, and I want to make a special, just call out to one of our staff members, Taylor West. He's been really instrumental in utilizing these tools to really try to unify these data sets, bring them into the umbrella of a GIS platform, because then from there you really can unleash, you really can unlock the power of these different data sets, and whether in terms of mapping, in terms of comparison, in terms of overlaying different, whether it's lake conditions or lake management interventions, harvesting maps or Moby Track shoreline cleanup maps or herbicide polygons, overlaying those with things like plant data from lake surveys or algal reports. That's been really important, because not only does it help us when we're looking at it from a very specific technical question, but hopefully it'll help more and more allow for more community involvement, more understanding, more accessibility of these data sets in a way that's meaningful to a broader audience, because it's not just the technical experts or the lake managers that hopefully should be seeing this stuff. It's members of government, it's members of of the public stakeholders. So the more we can unify these different data sets under this GIS umbrella, we can really start to put it in the hands of more people, we hope. And so that's been an important initiative that I think has really blossomed in the last couple of years, and I only see it getting better and better. And certainly with these groups coming in, whether it's the Jefferson Project or whether it's other universities, that's a lot of that's pretty common, and to make sure that we're equipped locally with the chops to be able to really step up and speak a lot of the same language, I think helps, because it helps move us in those relationships from beyond those initial points of, well, show me what you have, and then it's, here's a box of this and here's a box of that. It's a lot more efficient to be able to say, here's what we have and here's how you can now take it and run with it. So
Let me back up just a second for the lay person. Chautauqua Lake is owned by the state. And as a matter of fact, you'd say, well, why don't they just simply, because they have jurisdiction of the water, kind of take control? How does it work? How does it actually work where the state delegates or permits or licenses various organizations to work either with them or let them do projects which are, I don't know, do they bless it? Do they do their things? Whether it's harvesting on the lake, I know the herbicide, you have to go through the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, but just kind of walk me through the steps.
Well, as you pointed out, it's very specific to what you're proposing to do as to the level that a state agency or a federal agency or a local agency may get involved. So it is very project specific. You're right that with one very small exception, the state, the Office of General Services, owns the bottom of the lake. And from a practical standpoint, if you're proposing to do anything that basically falls at the mean water level and below, you're likely going to, well, you're going to need to at least do your due diligence on whether or not it triggers the threshold of a review or an approval from whether it's the state DEC or whether it's the Office of General Services or whether it's the Army Corps, if you're dredging, if you're trying to get a permit for an aquatic pesticide. One example is, and typically this is encouraged, is if you're contemplating something, you will hopefully ask the right questions of the right people early enough in your process so you don't get yourself down a path that's going to, at worst cost you some money or at best cost you some money, but at worst potentially jeopardize you in some legal fashion. But we do have, and these are great questions because these are the questions that have been getting asked, and they've stemmed some really good products in the last couple of years. So the county, through the Watershed Coordinator Dave McCoy and the occupancy tax program, working with the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, they actually put together kind of a toolkit of sorts, a how-to of I'm thinking of doing this on my property, or they've largely focused on the watershed side, because something as simple as putting bank stabilization in your creek by your house, depending on where you are, that could trigger any number of different levels of permit application, review, approval, oversight from the DEC or from the Army Corps. Or if you're on a different creek, it may largely be limited to, as long as you don't violate water quality law, you're generally in a place where you may not need that much stuff. So you always want to encourage good upfront communication, and I think the state prioritizes that as well. But you got to ask them the question, and you got to ask them the question clearly. So, if there's some other details you want me to try to get into,
I'm always curious. When there's dredging involved, or in fact you're shoring up a shoreline, or you want to build something which impacts, you're going to have to put some cement in the lake. There's a process.
Yeah.
And that's the state which you have to go through. Does the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Conservancy, does the Alliance, if I were a property owner, do I go to an organization that give me guidance, or do I just kind of wade in, no pun intended, with the state?
Well, it depends on how you like to go about it. Some people are very comfortable in the world of state regulations, and they take the approach of, if I don't have to talk to you, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to spend my time focused on the entities I know I need to satisfy, whether it's the local zoning with floodplain or whether it's the state or the feds. But I will say that we've had many great interactions with landowners who are contemplating something or have a question, whether they've come to us initially, and oftentimes we will, in the case of watershed projects, we'll refer to them to who we think can help them the best. Sometimes it is us, if they're, depending on where in their level of conceptualization there might be. But the Soil and Water Conservation District is a wonderful resource for people or for businesses that are contemplating something. The Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, of course, like we've mentioned. The county itself, the county planning department has a lot of great resources as well on sort of the do's and don'ts of different types of undertakings. So, due diligence is key, and there's no, at least when you ask me a question, I can speak only for myself, but there's no harm in it. There's usually more harm from trying to circumvent or trying to shortcut. And oftentimes there might be some short-term satisfaction from that, or short-term perceived advantage, but oftentimes, the long term is where you want to focus, because you want this thing to be whatever it is that you're contemplating, whether it's dredging or bank stabilization. You want it to not only work, but you also want it to be something you could be proud of and openly, support and say, this is something, here's an example of something good that I did. So that's.
Well, let me do it in that, because I don't want to dwell much more on this, but just the IDA, for example, as an analogy, is trying to become the initial portal for economic development. You're going to reach out to the folks at the IDA to say, hey, I got this issue, can you point me in the right direction? Does the Alliance serve that function now for water issues?
Well, again, it's a case-by-case basis. There may be some out there who feel like we can fill that role. We're a nonprofit. We're a not-for-profit organization. We have a mission and a focus that is not necessarily directly aligned with that approach. The Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy has been also a nonprofit. So again, jurisdictionally, regulation-wise, we're not the state. We're not a local government. We're not a substitute for that either. And I'll speak for the Alliance specifically, but again, we've really stressed trying to put as many resources at the fingertips of ourselves and our members, whether it's by our website or knowing where to look. So often these questions that are being asked aren't, everyone's unique. Everyone's idea is unique in a certain way, but a lot of times we've been around and around the horn as a collective that many of the questions have been asked and answered. So figuring out the most efficient way to put somebody in line with a good asking and answering of that question is our goal. So so we certainly want to do as best we can, but we also know we try to stay within our scope and within our focal points, and just try to rely on others that have gone before us to do these sorts of things.
Just again, just my last question really on the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan. It's been around, it was adopted about 12, 13 years ago. Is it subject to review and amendment? Or is this, right now you have a document, is there a procedure where somebody can go in and analyze, say, well, this section really is dated, or we got more information?
Well, that would be up to the county ultimately as the owner of the plan to determine whether or not an update is something that they want to consider. One thing though that's an example of where the document itself, the 2010 Watershed Management Plan, is a standing document, but since then, when you look at the projects that have spun out of it, whether they're alliance partnered or otherwise, you look at the types of deliverables that have been generated from other projects. The Lakewood, Village of Lakewood, Town of Bustye, we worked with them on a very comprehensive stormwater management engineering study, which has a lot of the same aspects of the watershed management plan, but at a much greater level of detail, specifically for the portion of the watershed that drains the Village of Lakewood and the Town of Bustye. So, a lot of the same principles. There's a lot of good comparability, and obviously when that work gets undertaken, you use, or your engineer uses, the most current data available. So land cover and land use is probably one of the places that we continue to get updates from the government every several years. There's also been a lot of advancements in the topographical data sets, so using things, new technologies to get higher resolution elevation data sets. Those are really key parts. So if you were ever to contemplate updating a watershed management plan, those would be the types of things you would oftentimes find the greatest level of change in terms of availability and the years that you might use. So, for a 2010 watershed management plan, you're probably using, data sets that might be a couple of years prior to that. So now if we were looking ahead, you're looking at things that are much more advanced, things like the forest cover, things like the developed areas, heck, even something
like the big developments along the lake shore itself, the Harbor Hotel just recently, obviously that was vacant land at the time that the watershed management plan was. But I think a key question is what am I trying to use this for? What am I trying to gain from this document? What question am I trying to answer? And if you can run through a thought exercise of, if I had a slightly different land cover data set than I had 10 years ago, would the decision I make really be any different, or am I simply just lamenting the fact that I have a document that has the year 2010 on it? Do I need, is it actionable information? Is it going to lead me down a different path? And in that case, there's plenty of ways that new undertakings can access the new data that are deemed important and useful and actionable, and you can simply redo certain aspects of a dated plan under this new reality, and you can oftentimes figure out what you need to figure out without necessarily overhauling 100,000 acre watershed worth of plans. That's my opinion. If the state or a funding entity ever were to say, and this can happen, I'm not saying it has or it will, but this can sometimes happen where if you don't, if you're a dam owner, a high hazard dam, and you don't have your ducks in a row in terms of your documents that you then present to the federal government, you're going to be in jeopardy with a lot of things. You may have a whole variety of things happen, whereas up till this point, there hasn't necessarily been a line in the sand where somebody says, a power that be says, until you update this plan or this plan, we're not going to give you another nickel. So obviously that would be a consideration for looking at these things.
But the plan itself is owned by the county, and it would be up to the county to initiate any sort of kind of significant review of it, just as a practical matter.
That would be my understanding of it. Yeah.
The other strategy, is the Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy, which is under your jurisdiction. And talk a little bit about that. Again, for the layperson, what's that?
Yeah. So macrophytes are aquatic plants. To put it very broadly and probably slightly inaccurately, so anybody out there where I'm slightly off, I am doing it for effect for the general audience. But the aquatic plants that grow in our lake, we refer to them as macrophytes. To think about the MMS for short, it's sort of interesting to me, at least, to look at it as a continuum. So not to go back in time, but that watershed management plan was one of the first steps. It begot erosion diagnosis mitigation studies for certain sub-watersheds. It really spurred additional detailed investigation led by the county. And then this MMS, this macrophyte management strategy, was largely intended as a parallel, sibling type of document. So the watershed management plan focused on, you guessed it, the watershed itself. The macrophyte management strategy really meant to get into the details of the lake itself, acknowledging the watershed, but also deferring to the basis of understanding determined and benchmarked in the watershed management plan. So the macrophyte management strategy was finalized in 2017. It was the culmination of many years. A lot of the same players that would have helped with the watershed management plan, also helped with the macrophyte management strategy. So a similar kind of collective effort led by the county, work by various consultants to gather data and to perform technical assistance and to write the bulk of the report. Ultimately, the county shepherded that through. It looks at a whole host of things. When we think about a lake, it's not just the water, it's not just the substrate, the sediment below, it's not just the shoreline, it's the people that use it, it's the plants that grow in it, it's the animals that grow in it, it's it's all aspects of it. And this MMS really tried to if you look at it, you really see that it's broken up into a number of different discrete categories, looking at the physical setting, the biological setting, but then really attempting to hone in on the human uses, and then really, the conflicts of where the environmental conditions of the lake, largely the plants, and that's one place that it was determined to focus on the plants themselves, which, as we touched on a while back, the algal community really was left out of the macrophyte management strategy in terms of an in-depth look. So we're really talking about the plants themselves, which are an important part and one of the most kind of day-to-day apparent parts of the lake, but in terms of the food web or the biological web, it's only one aspect. So trying to, almost taking a planning level approach to the lake, breaking it up into discrete zones. So there's hundreds of management zones that are one of the outcomes of the macrophyte management strategy. And those zones still exist on paper, on maps. They still guide some of the dialogue and decision making. For instance, utilizing them in some of the herbicide permitting of late. And it sought to identify uses, characteristics, things like sensitive receptors, rare and threatened endangered species, fish spawning, and this is all, this is dated in that it was the setting of the lake some years prior to 2017 when the document was finalized. So, as with the watershed management plan, when decisions are being made, the MMS still maintains a place in terms of being an important document to consider. But there's probably, if I had to put the two against one another, the watershed management plan and the macrophyte management strategy, in terms of year to year new data being collected, I'd say that the MMS probably has had a lot more new information generated, especially locally and specific to the lake, than probably the watershed management plan has in terms of what's changed since it was finalized. So that being said, it's one part of how we look at the lake, but it's not the only part. When you think about Racine Johnson aquatic ecologists, they've been looking at the lake, whether it's plant communities, herbivores that may graze on those plants, mussels. They've got a pretty comprehensive collection of studies and reports dating back about 20 years, and the Chautauqua Lake Association hosts those reports on their websites, and so that shows that there's these long-term data sets that exist sort of in parallel to, and then come 2017 surpassing this macrophyte management strategy. New to the game around 2020, North Carolina State University began also looking at the plant communities on Chautauqua Lake. And then the DEC, of course, the DEC fisheries will look at a variety of fish-related aspects of the lake on a annual or sub-annual basis, whether it's catch surveys from anglers or spawning locations in the lake, or a whole host of other things, electrofishing and things like that. So, that's where, I'm not if you could get somebody from the DEC to come sit in this chair, they might be able to give a little more insight as to how they use that MMS as a tool in their day-to-day decision making, but also how they also complement that with new and updated information. And that's one place that I think has been another new development is the new regional director of DEC from the Buffalo region, Region 9. She's sought out a lot of Chautauqua Lake stakeholders since she started in her role, including the Alliance Board, and I think there's been an indication that there's a desire for some increased involvement, especially when it comes to getting a stronger basis of understanding for the lake, and I think that's a great opportunity, and it shows that you don't always need a massive comprehensive undertaking to make, really important strides when it comes to understanding the lake and managing the lake.
Well, along that line, with the DEC, usually around March, April, May, there's a lot of publicity regarding the balance that goes on for the two-pronged approach, and really basically the curly leaf pondweed growth. You've got the mechanical harvesting and you've got the herbicide. And you got two kind of separate entities which are advancing their particular causes. Not one necessarily against the other, but there's a balancing act. Does the Alliance get involved in that? Because the DEC obviously has to approve the permitting for the herbicide. Does the DEC also get on to the extent of, for example, the Chautauqua Lakes Association harvesting, its geography that it actually will harvest?
Well, looking ahead to 2023, it's still to be determined. One of the things that, I've learned is that when it comes to an entity with kind of the full and objective oversight of the lake's management, they can, sometimes adapt their approaches on a year-to-year basis under their mandate to enforce and regulate. So, until something happens, I always want to be careful to say that something will or won't happen, because, I think as we've evolved as a community, I think the state as well in their role as a regulator continues to evolve as well. When it comes to, and you said a two-pronged approach, and certainly when it comes to some of the early season plant management, that's a good way to describe it. When you think about the overall lake management that we see in a given year, I kind of look at it more as a three-pronged approach, in terms of you have the plant management itself, the growth that's happening in the lake, but then there's also the shoreline and nearshore cleanup that goes along with it to really, regardless of what's growing, it's what's coming up along the shoreline. What are those shorelines used for? What's the right balance of the natural existence of a lake and how it processes biological materials, and how that can be an important part of how a lake functions, but also where those conflicts exist with lake uses, and also sometimes acting as a stagnation point or a nucleation point for some of these algal blooms that can produce cyanotoxins or other nuisance algae. So in terms of the dictation of the blend, the Alliance certainly has a role in that. We've been, for a fifth year, we've been asked to help solicit, identify, prioritize project proposals from our members, looking ahead to the next year. So in this case, we're in the process of doing that for 2023, and that's to administer funding from our consolidated local foundation program, which the initial steps would include funding from the Linnae Foundation, the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, and the Sheldon Foundation. And then follow on to that, we've also been fortunate to receive funds from the Holmberg Foundation, the Hultquist Foundation, and then also through the County of Chautauqua's occupancy tax program. So there's a pretty big pool of local dollars that the Alliance board is being asked to administer, and that takes an element of review and prioritization to make those determinations for what local communal dollars are going to go to each of these different programs, whether it's lake management or whether it's watershed programs or fighting new invasive species. There's a big blended program that we're in the process of seeing how it's going to shake out. The state certainly has a pretty big, anything they permit, they're going to exert the majority of the control over how much, if any, of that action takes place. So permits without an aquatic pesticide permit, without that, you're not going to do any of that in the lake. So there's a certain metering of that by the state, a very hands-on approach, because ultimately they make the final decision on what, if anything, is appropriate in terms of the chemical management. In terms of the harvesting or the shoreline cleanup, there are rules in place, guidelines, rules in terms of what you can and can't do in the water and along near the shore. One of the biggest things is along the bottom. What are you doing on the bottom with regard? And that's really gets down to the, the water quality, sediment suspension and things like that. So they certainly do, they do exert their level of control that they deem appropriate on whether it's Moby tracks, which are tracked amphibious vehicles that work mostly near the shore and along the shoreline. Whether it's the paddle wheels on a Chautauqua Lake Association harvester, or props on a boat, or the bottom of a barge, or anything like that. The DEC does have the ability to monitor and regulate and provide information, and we certainly when we put dollars from these collective pots into these programs, we first and foremost it's this program must align with applicable state or federal or other regulations, and that goes without saying, but that's really where there can be some control, but it's ultimately up to the state as to how they want to exercise that.
One of the things, just for the camera folks, Jay Young from your office put together a review, a year in review for Chautauqua Lake. That's online. It was also in the Post-Journal. And just to highlight a little bit of what you just said, last year at this time, the Chautauqua Lake Association harvesters collected around 710 tons of early season plants between May and June, while the Chautauqua Lake Partnership collaborated with 3 municipalities and the New York State DEC on chemical management. On May 24th, Solitude Lake Management applied the herbicide Aquathol K to around 101 acres in the town of Ellery, village of Bemis Point, village of Sauron, with the goal of reducing the curly leaf pondweed. And then it goes on throughout the year itself of the report, which the Alliance was reporting on, observing, and making it a reality. I know you can't necessarily talk about it, so let me go into a subject anyways. You talked about funding and the various sources of funding. As this is being live, there is the issue of whether there might be additional sources of funding in the form of a lake tax district, and conversations as to alternatives, again, to enhance the pot of money, which would assist organizations like the Alliance to make the goals of the watershed management and the macrophyte strategy a reality. Is there a role for the Alliance in the determination of not only whether and or what that might look like?
Well, so just to back up, the county has commissioned the Chautauqua Lake Protection Rehabilitation Agency. So it's an agency that's populated with a variety of governmental or sort of at-large leadership around the lake. The Alliance does not have a seat on the Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation Agency. We're interested. We're keeping an eye on things, just as many members of the stakeholder community are. And basically where that CLPRA is they have engaged a consultant, Barton and LaJudas, who is working on a phase 1 assessment of different funding mechanisms or different potential funding mechanisms. So there's a variety of ways that revenues, in other parts of the state or other parts of the country have been generated through these district approaches. So right now the CLPRA is in this stage where they've got a consultant evaluating potential funding mechanisms, but it says at this stage implementation of any of those mechanisms, if any are ultimately implemented, would be up to the county legislature to determine whether or not to move forward with what would be dubbed phase 2, which would be looking at the options for actually implementing one or more or some combination of these different funding mechanisms. So So we're still early in the process. There's no a district does not exist. A district would need to be formed, at the county level, after the completion of whatever remaining due diligence they deem appropriate in terms of assessing the different options. That being said, like I said, we continue to be aware of it. We continue to help facilitate awareness of the public meetings. So, for instance, the CLPRA has hosted a handful of public sessions that we've helped to spread the word about when asked. So we certainly try to utilize our communications network to help, as we would with a lot of these initiatives, to get the public involved when appropriate or when asked. When I say I or we, it's more of a general, kind of stance or understanding. It's not an official position, but I think I can say comfortably that we support the full and fair evaluation of this concept, because it's been deemed appropriate by our county government, and they've initiated these various steps towards that. In terms of what it could mean for the Alliance, we're so far removed from any finality that any projections or predictions would be premature. All I can say is when we look at what we as the Alliance have done, when you look at the last 5 or so years, have we shown a blueprint for how working together and how coordinating and collecting these different funding sources into a single consolidated approach? Have we shown that there's a blueprint for that? I'd say yes. Have we shown that there's an ability to grow that that framework for more structured decision making and prioritization? I'd say yes. And and if you look at just the amount of monetary value, a district, would be such a scaled up approach of any of this stuff, presumably, or at least it would be a more it'd be a more sustained, more formal arrangement. We always try to stress, being thankful and being appreciative of what we do have, while still keeping an eye on what might be to come. What we don't have or what we strive for. But we've been so fortunate to have the support of the local charitable foundations to really build this coordinated and consolidated approach. The Lene Foundation, the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, the Sheldon Foundation, Holmberg Foundation, the Holtquist Foundation, the Gebbe Foundation, and then the county's occupancy tax program. We've been really blessed to have those resources to go into this local system, because frankly, from a state grant perspective, there's been a wonderful array of watershed-based projects that are geared toward long-term health of the lake. But when it comes to the year-to-year maintenance of the lake, the cleaning of the shoreline areas and the nearshore areas, the management of nuisance vegetation, that's largely local dollars. And it's not just the Alliance routed monies, it's also the charitable donations that our members themselves, whether it's the Chautauqua Lake Association, Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua Lake Partnership, the donations that they generate from the community. The state also funds some of these initiatives directly, which also is part of the overall picture. The occupancy tax program, they run a competitive grant program nearly every year that has typically put $250,000 plus or minus into the watershed on a year-to-year basis. So, being very appreciative of what we currently have, while also still being able to look at what a more sustainable, a more predictable framework might look like. There's a lot of things that may get deferred when you're going year to year, when you aren't necessarily able to make a 5-year budget or a 10-year budget. Things like capital investments and such, those are very challenging to weave into the year-to-year needs. But since around 2017, I was looking at the numbers today, and you look at we were In terms of dollars routed through the Alliance to our members for work or for other, to others for other projects, we're talking about a 20-fold increase in the number of dollars that we've been asked to administer from around 2017 to today, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of where we've come from and where we are and the role that we currently serve, and I'm very interested in maximizing our effectiveness and our utilization to the local community as it currently sits. And if in the future that framework changes, I'd hope that we'd position ourselves through our past work and through our demonstrated capabilities of our board of directors and our staff and our stakeholder relationships and these research initiatives that are ongoing, not just tied to the Alliance, but outside and really growing in a lot of different directions. I'd like to think that we'd be strongly positioned to help in any potential new paradigm that might exist in the future.
We should get a little more enthusiastic about your job, just to underscore what you've just said here, it's a slide which you gave to me. Progress through partnership, it's entitled. The Alliance Partnered Projects 2015 to 2022. Approximately 98 grants, projects, programs valued at $9.2 million, which included a blend of lake, watershed, and research monitoring. Our time's going to come to an end here soon, Randall, but I always like to ask the question. You knew this was coming. You agreed to the third time. So the same question is going to come at you. But what's the question you expected tonight that we just in the course of this conversation have failed to get to?
Oh, that's my question.
Yeah.
Well, you got me there because I'd really like to know what, because I think I talked so much that I may have undercut some of the notes you have in front of you. So, yeah,
well, let me just
I'd
say,
like to hear from you.
Well, no. Let me just say that the online is a terrific amount of detail, and we just glossed over the top of it. Some of the areas I wanted to get into. Some of the areas which have been, again, peripheral perhaps to the Alliance, but have been conversations in the newspaper quite a bit. The extension of the sewer, which of course is a watershed to actually put it in the pipe. Phase 1 going to Stowe. It seems, that's a reality. You can't help but stop your car going up 394 and watch the work being done for seemingly hours on end. And but there also seems to be now a continuation or funding for the continuation of Phase 2. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and certainly, my words, others' work. The county sewer districts have been, and the Chautauqua Utility District at the institution have been just, massively instrumental in continuing these efforts to not only extend public sewers to areas that previously were unserviced by public systems, but also to improve the treatment capabilities at the wastewater treatment plants, and we're now really starting to see the fruits of those labors as these treatment systems have been online for several years now, and they're going to just keep paying off in perpetuity. That's the great thing about those types of investments, is it's not just a one-time deal. It's cumulative. Just like the problems of loading to the lake are cumulative, so too are some of the solutions. So in terms of the coverage of public sewers around the lake, roughly 2/3 of our lake within the beltway of the 430 and the 394 state routes around the lake has been is serviced by public collection systems that take the waste from our house or our business and send it to a treatment plant, whether it's up in Mayville at the institution or down in Celeron. And so this remaining 1/3 has roughly been from around Asheville up to around the Prendergast fish hatchery. So that's that last area, and it's a challenge because the topography of the lake, it's developed, but it's not. You think about a centralized city system where you've got people in 360 degrees of, it really makes a lot of dollars and cents to run these public systems. It's really hard when it's spread out over, in this case, over the course of about 7 miles of lakeshore. So yes, phase one, which is being undertaken by the South and Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer Districts, is under construction, and it's slated to be wrapped up. They believe by around early 2024. So that means hooking up, and please do not take this as a substitute for a proper construction schedule and all the various particulars of the contracts they have. But we're looking within the next months to around a year to have several hundred septic systems, many of which either through age or just through the sheer hydrology of the system have been, whether it's short circuited under high water levels, they've been putting, I'd say, undertreated waste into the lake just by virtue of the closeness to the lake and the way an on-site treatment system is intended to work. There's a lot of challenges. So those several hundred parcels are going to be hooked up soon, and immediately, once those systems are taken offline and are have the ability to kind of live out the remainder of their effective life in terms of their impact on the water quality, those wastes are going to be conveyed down to Celeron, and they're going to be treated and they're going to be discharged. In essence, having almost a if you think about where the wastewater treatment plant is in relation to the lake basin, in essence, you're really taking that waste and you're taking it completely out of the lake system and treating it and discharging it. And then that remaining approximately half of the third, so sixth of the lake, running from Stowe, Tom's Point, up to Prendergast, the county shared some amazing news in the last several weeks of having because you're talking about a $20 million plus project for phase two, and through a lot of hard work of the districts, the county, the towns involved, others, the state agencies, the funding framework has been put together such that they've now announced that they will be moving forward with the design, finalizing the design for that phase two extension, and then ultimately going to construction bid. And we're looking at probably into the 2026 range of completion, but that would link those two unsewered areas. You'd have basically full coverage all the way around the lake, and in terms of those 1,200 or plus or minus septic systems, that's going to be a really immediate and really tangible positive impact in terms of the phosphorus and nitrogen loads going into the lake, but also things like wells. The proximity of septic systems to drinking water wells is, when you're in a tight, narrow corridor where you're bounded on one side by water. There's not a lot of great choices in terms of placement. So hopefully from a human health standpoint as well, those drinking water supplies are going to be further protected by getting these septic systems taken offline and moving to a public system, along with the various opportunities for growth and expansion, whether it's from capacity of existing places or potentially even new places, whether it's the I-86, Cloverleaf or other areas along the lake that maybe are currently underutilized or have some opportunities to grow once public sewers are a reality. Maybe in the future, public water, is another thing that has continued to be looked at in a lot of areas of the lake, and it's just a wonderful achievement. Although a lot of work still to be done, but just want to commend the Alliance members, but also the community as a whole in really bringing this to fruition. So,
just again, a continuation of it's going to go up essentially once it gets connected to Prendergast, and then the connection is down with Chautauqua Utility District, right?
Well, the extension, the west side extension up to the Prendergast Fish Hatchery or thereabouts,
Yeah.
it's a South and Center Chautauqua Lake
Okay.
Sewer District's extension. So those flows are going to be conveyed southward to the
But
south.
the coverage then now will be, really, that's a connect to that whole west side of the lake.
Yep.
And then the treatment plant in Westfield, and then down 430, where does it sort of end?
Well, just in terms of where the phase two extension is going to go, it's going to butt up against the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer
Right.
District, which then has a little bit of a southward leg, and then the Chautauqua Utility District, and then North Chautauqua above that. In terms of the 430 side, could you repeat?
No, I just question, right now, in Mayville, there's certain portions of 430 there, Mayville, where Mayville, there's coverage. Where does it end? It doesn't,
Oh, well,
is that by Midway? I've always had this vision. Does it sort of end by Midway, where the current?
Oh, well, I think there's a few remaining small areas that maybe, they're still slated for some extensions, but as to the exact locations, I'd want to get a map out, and I don't want to mislead anybody on this talk. So I apologize, I can't give you those exact details.
I love apologies, it's great. No apologies, because, I've gone over our time, but I think everybody would have hung in here to learn so much from a guy like you with so much enthusiasm. And again, I thank you very much, third year running, and I can't frankly wait until the fourth year. So
Should we just move right into next year's and
yeah,
tape
just
it?
pretend. Let's just fast forward. This is 2023, 24 now. Let's talk about it. But thank you. You want a final word while we wrap up?
I should just say thank you and shut up, but I do want to make sure I reiterate that, I really appreciate this opportunity to share, not only information about our organization, but also the overall picture. And it's my presentation of the overall picture. I think it's important to understand that there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different ideas, a lot of dialogue that is ongoing and also is necessary to continue. While I appreciate the opportunity to be a voice here, I can't stress enough that I'm not the only voice, nor should I be, and I certainly, want to be sure that everyone hears that come from my mouth, today, and I appreciate the chance to be part of this and continue to, to do good work worth doing and to embrace the understanding that there's a lot more that we don't know and a lot more that we need to figure out together to really keep going in the right direction.
Well, suffice it to say, Randall, you may be one voice, but you're an enlightened voice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.